Greeting, friends and brethren. Dr. Bob Thiel, the Continuing Church of God. And, this is a sixth part of our six-part series on the Book of the Law, the Book of Deuteronomy, something that the Bible commands us to read every 7 years in the Feast of Tabernacles. As a matter of fact, since that's in chapter 31, it's one place I expect to get to today. We've covered the first 28 chapters, and so we're going to begin chapter 29. I'll be using the New King James Version of the Bible pretty much exclusively today. And so we'll dig right in. Deuteronomy 29, starting verse 1. These are the words of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant which he made with them in Horeb. Moses called all Israel and said to them, "You've seen all the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh, to all his servants, and to his land, the great trials which your eyes have seen, the signs and the great wonders. Yet the Lord has not given you a heart to perceive and eyes to hear to this very day." Now, I won't pick on him by name, but there was a man who's here today, and I was talking to him before services, and he made a comment to me. He says, all this stuff should be really clear, what's going on with the world, and with Scripture and all this. It should be really obvious. But we see even back over 3,000 years ago, they saw the signs, they saw the miracles, they saw the wonders, and they still didn't get it. Which gets me, one of the things I said, we've got the ecumenical movement going on right now, and they don't even have signs and lying wonders of any great degree yet. They've had some, but not enough that's super massive. But when the children of Israel actually see signs from God, they still didn't quite get it. People think, if I saw all these miracles, for sure I would do it. God said, no. And we figure there are a couple of million people associated with seeing these things, by the way. They just didn't get it. Verse 5, "And I led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes have not worn out on you. Your sandals worn out on your feet." They didn't give that any thought, too. They just said, that's normal. Clothes last that long. No, they didn't. And they were wandering in the desert. Okay, this wasn't nice, cotton or wool carpet or, even polyester carpet. That's not what they were walking on. Walk on rocks and sand and all that kind of stuff. "You've not eaten bread, nor have you drunk wine or similar drink, that you may know that I am the Lord your God. When you came to this place, Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and Og, the king of Bashan, came out against you to battle, and we conquered them. And we took their land and gave as an inheritance to the Reubenites and the Gadites and the tribe of Manasseh. Therefore, keep the words of this covenant and do them, that you may prosper in all you do. All of you stand today before the Lord your God, your leaders and your tribes, and your elders, and all your officers and men of Israel, your little ones and your wives, also the strangers in your camp, from the one who cuts the wood to the one who draws water, that you may enter the covenant with the Lord your God, and do his oath, which he, with the Lord your God, makes with you today, that he may establish you today as a people to himself, that he may be God to you, just as he spoke unto you, just as he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Well, you notice God wants people to respond. And one of the things I did this morning, I grabbed a booklet I haven't held up so far during this series, is God Calling You. And this book or booklet, or any other ones I hold up today, are available at the www.ccog.org website. Go under the Literature tab, Books and Booklets, it's there. If you're not sure if God's calling you, this is a good book to read. And even if you think God is calling you, it's a good book to read. And even think God has called you, and even God has called you, I still think it's a good book for you to read if you haven't done so. And if you have done so, it's okay to read it again. I wouldn't be offended. It has lots of scriptures. "I make this covenant and this oath not with you alone, but with him who stands here with us today before the Lord your God, as well as he who is not with us today. For you know you dwelt in the land of Egypt, and we came through the nations which you passed by. And you saw the abominations and their idols which they had among them, wood and stone and silver and gold. So not be maybe among you the man or woman or family or tribe whose heart turns away today from the Lord your God to go and serve the gods of those nations, that they may not be among you a root bearing bitterness or wormwood." And we've seen that. We've seen people who've become bitter against the Church of God, particularly with the apostasy that hit the old worldwide Church of God. And others since then, actually, but not quite to that degree, I suppose. Verse 19, So it may not happen. When he hears the words of this curse, he blesses himself in his heart, saying, I have peace, even though I follow the dictates of my heart. As though the drunkard could be included with the sober. So in other words, you just can't say, well, I'm doing it my way, and I know my way is best, and that's okay. God's like, that's like the drunk saying he's like a sober person. It's like, if you won't do it God's way, there isn't any real other way, at least not a proper one. Verse 20, the Lord would not spare him, for then the anger of the Lord and his jealousy would burn against that man, and every curse that's written in this book would settle on him, and the Lord would blot his name out from under heaven. This is one of the early references also to the book of life, as being blotted out. Verse 21, and the Lord would separate him from all the tribes for adversity, according to all the curses of the covenant which are written in this book of the law. You notice again, he calls this the book of the law. So that the coming generation of your children who rise up after you, and a foreigner who comes from a far land would say, when they see the plagues of the land and the sickness which the Lord had laid on it, the whole land is brimstone and salt and burning. It's not sown, it does not bear, nor does grass grow there. Like the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zebulun, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and his wrath. Now before I go any further from this, I wanted to comment, this deal with brimstone is kind of like what happens in a nuclear attack. All right? And you see the references to Sodom and Gomorrah. The New Testament warns about those who declare their sins like Sodom. A lot of cities, probably including this one, have pride parades to declare their sins. And these cursings, including something that resembles a nuclear war, are going to happen to this nation and others. Now, anyway, going back to this chapter, verse 24, all nations would say, why has the Lord done this to this land? What does the heat of this great anger mean? Then the people would say, because they've forsaken the covenant of the Lord their God and their fathers that he made with them when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. And I'll go a little bit more on the identity of the nations that God brought out of Egypt in, I think, chapter 33. For they went and they served other gods and worshipped them, gods that they did not know and that he had not given them. Then the anger of the Lord was aroused against this land to bring on it every curse that's written in this book. And the Lord uprooted them and their land in anger, from their land in anger, in wrath, and in great indignation, and cast them into another land, as it is this day. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law. So this is saying, look, a lot of things are revealed for us, and they're in God's Word. Now, we don't know everything. It says that too. But there are things that are revealed, and every 7 years, this particular book we're supposed to read during the Feast of Tabernacles. Now we'll go to chapter 30. Now it shall come to pass, when all these things come upon you, the blessings and the curse which I set before you, you shall call them to mind among all the nations, where the Lord your God drives you. Notice that saying, they're not just going to be in one place, the descendants of Israel. Again, we'll get to that a little bit later. And return to the Lord your God and obey his voice according to all that I've commanded you today. You and your children, with all your heart and with all your soul, that the Lord your God will bring you back from captivity and have compassion on you and gather you from all the nations which the Lord your God has scattered you. And yes, captivity will be coming to this nation and some others. If any of you are driven to the farthest parts under the heaven, and from there the Lord your God will gather you, from there he'll bring you. You think of places like the United States, people didn't even know about the Western Hemisphere when Moses wrote this. Think of places like Australia and New Zealand, pretty far places to end up. Anyway, verse 5, then the Lord your God will bring you to the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. He will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, that you may live. Again, these commandments and statutes are so we will live, not only in this age, but in the age to come. Also, the Lord your God will put out all these curses on your enemies and those who hate you and who persecuted you. And we've got persecution coming. And you will again obey the voice of the Lord, and do all his commandments, which I command you today. The Lord your God will make you abound in the work of your hands, in the fruit of your body, in the increase of your livestock, and the produce of your land for good. For the Lord will again rejoice over you for the good he's rejoiced over your fathers, if you obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and the statutes which are written in this book of the law. And if you turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. And in the New Testament, for example, and I'm not going to read it, but Hebrews 12:25 tells us that we're not supposed to turn away. Okay, so this was not just an admonition to the ancient children of Israel, but also in the New Testament we see also being told to Christians today. Verse 11. For this I command you. I'm going to have to stop for a moment. I see an error. I'm very sorry. My error. I was looking for this mic where it was not, and thought it was down on the ground. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, verse 11. For this commandment which I command you today is not too mysterious for you, nor is it far off. It's not in heaven that you should say, who will ascend to heaven for us and bring it down that we may hear it and do it. Nor is it beyond the sea that we should say, who should go over the sea and bring it down to us that we may hear it and do it. But the word is very near you, in your mouth and your hearts, that you may do it. And hopefully right now it's in your ears, in your eyes, if you have a Bible that you're following along. Verse 15. See, I set you before you today life and death, life and good, death and evil. And the command that I command you today, to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, that you may live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land which you go to possess. But if your heart turn away, so you do not hear, and are drawn to worship other gods and serve them, I announce to you today, you shall surely perish. You shall not prolong your days in land which you cross over the Jordan to go in and possess. I call heaven and earth as a witness today against you, that I set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live. Repeatedly we were told that God's commands are for our good, so we may have life. Verse 20, that you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey his voice, you may cling to him, for he is your life and the length of your days, that you may dwell in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them. Now we're going to go to chapter 31. Then Moses went and spoke these words to all Israel, and he said to them, I'm 120 years old today, significantly older than any of us. I can no longer go out and come in. Also the Lord has said to me, you cannot cross over to this Jordan. The Lord your God himself crosses over before you. He'll destroy those nations from before you, and you shall dispossess them. Joshua himself crosses over before you, just as the Lord has said. And the Lord will do to them as he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites in their land, when he destroyed them. The Lord will give them over to you, that you may do to them according to every commandment which I commanded you. Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear or be afraid of them. Again, we're not going out and fighting massive battles, but as it says in Luke 12:32, fear not, little flock, for it's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sometimes we face tests and obstacles that we may find frightening as well. Anyway, for the Lord your God, he's the one who goes with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. We should read that also in the New Testament. Then Moses called Joshua and said to him, be strong and be of good courage. You must go with this people to the land which the Lord has sworn his fathers to give them. You shall cause them to inherit it. The Lord, he is one who goes before you. He'll be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Now, we know that Moses did not get to go over himself. He didn't quite believe God a couple of times. At least that's the impression I get from reading the Old Testament. But he did get to glimpse the Holy Land, the Promised Land. And when we're at the Feast of Tabernacles, we kind of get a glimpse of the millennial kingdom. Now, I realize it will be different than this. You won't have to worry about keys, for example. At least I hope not. We shouldn't have to do that. Well, of course, the spirit beings you wouldn't at all. But and we're physical right now. But we get a glimpse of the coming kingdom. And Moses, that's basically what he got, was a glimpse of the promised land. Now to verse 9. So Moses wrote this law and delivered it to the priests. So again, we see that Moses wrote this. We have secular sources who assure you that Moses didn't write this, because Moses couldn't write, there was no writing. Despite the fact it was very clear, it says in the New Testament that Moses was trained in basically the knowledge of whatever the Egyptians, and they had hieroglyphics, probably some form of a Canaanite language or a Proto-Canaanite language, and by the way, Jesus said that Moses wrote it as well, but people who don't believe in Jesus and don't really believe the Bible don't believe Moses wrote it. But again, you see it says in Scripture, Moses did write it. And we've got a book that I'm not going to hold up right now because it's not published, but it is available online, called Who Gave the World the Bible? We go into this in a little more depth there. Okay, he wrote this law, delivered to the priests, the sons of Levi, who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, and to all the elders of Israel. Moses commanded them, at the end of every 7 years, at the appointed time, the year of release, at the Feast of Tabernacles, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, you shall read this law before all Israel to their hearing. And we've been doing that this particular feast. It's 7 years since I did it last time, which is 7 years from the first time I tried to do it. And so this is our sixth sermon, which we intend to cover this and fulfill this particular command that we're supposed to do. Verse 12. Gather the people together, men and women, and the little ones, and the stranger who is within your gates, that they may hear, and that they may learn to fear the Lord their God, and to carefully observe all the words of this law, that their children who have not known it may hear and learn to fear the Lord their God, as long as you live in the land which you cross the Jordan to possess. Now we'll go to verse 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, the day approaches that you must die. Call Joshua and present yourselves in the tabernacle of the meeting, that I may inaugurate him. So Moses and Joshua went and presented themselves in the tabernacle of the meeting. Now the Lord appeared at the tabernacle in a pillar of cloud, and a pillar of cloud stood above the door of the tabernacle. And the Lord said to Moses, Behold, you will rest with your fathers, and this people will rise and play the harlot with the gods of the foreigners in the land where they go among them. And they'll forsake me and break my covenant which I've made with them. Now, how many times have we read, or have I read, and you've listened to these 6 sermons? God says, don't forget, remember, don't forget, don't turn away, remember, do this, do this, do this. Now God says, okay, we said this a bunch of times, but they're not going to do it. Verse 17, then my anger will be aroused against them in that day, and I will forsake them. You know, in the New Testament, in 2 Thessalonians, we read about a falling away, and we saw a massive falling away from the old world, the truths from the old worldwide Church of God. And, you know, those people, they didn't get the book of the law read to them every 7 years, but they did get some version of the law and the commandments and the Word of God every week for years, and they fell away. Don't think it can't happen. Anyway, and I will hide my face from them, and they will be devoured, and many evils and troubles shall befall them, so that they will say in that day, have not all these evils come upon us because our God is not among us? When the great tribulation hits, many will finally realize, oops, and for many of them it will be too late. Verse 18, and I will surely hide my face in that day because of all the evil which they've done, and they've turned away to other gods. There are people that we knew for a long time who used to keep God's holy days, and we do have a booklet on that. But for whatever reason, when they were told they could keep demonic holidays instead, they switched. You know, I said I'd mostly use the New King James, but in the Old King James, 1 Thessalonians 5:21 says, prove all things, hold fast that which is good. In the New King James, it says, test all things, hold fast what is good. We thought these people were among us, and they tested all things, and apparently they didn't prove it. Because when they were told, oh, go ahead, you can go worship other gods, do this kind of stuff, they went and did it. Okay, go to verse 19. Therefore, write down this song for yourselves and teach it to the children of Israel, and put it in their mouths, so that this song may be a witness to me against the children of Israel. Speaking of songs, we sang "Oh how love I Thy Law" from our hymnal today. It's the last song before the sermonette. And one of the things the Psalms do is kind of remind us. And over here we see Deuteronomy. God says we've got another song to try to help people remember. Maybe verse 20. When I brought them to the land flowing with milk and honey, which I swore to their fathers, and they have eaten and filled themselves and grown fat, then they will turn to other gods and serve them, and they will provoke me and break my covenant. Then it shall be, when many evils and troubles have come upon them, that this song will testify against them as a witness, for it will not be forgotten in the mouths of their descendants. For I know the inclination of their behavior today, even before I brought them to the land which I swore to give them. So we knew that the carnally minded are going to be carnally minded, even when they see things. You think they'd consider their history. Now, I talk about history a lot. If you're Protestant or you had a Protestant background, I would suggest you pay some attention to church history. Matter of fact, I find this kind of amusing. Several years back, in the Protestant publication called Christianity Today, they told people to look at church history. And I was thinking, really? You really want Protestants to look into church history? Because if Protestants look into church history, you know what they're not going to find? American Protestantism. It's not there. Okay? And you know who knows this? Pretty much any Protestant scholar who's done any looks at it. We have a book called Hope and Salvation, How the Continuing Church of God Differs from Protestantism. We just got this out. It's just under 400 pages. And to make a long story short, there's so little stuff on Protestant history that they've tended to accept an apostate by the name of Marcion of Pontus as one of their predecessors, and everybody condemned him. And if you actually knew what he taught, there's no way you'd think a Protestant would accept him, but they don't have church history. What they teach and what the Bible teaches is not the same. Sola Scriptura does not look like what most Protestants observe today. Now, you might be watching this and saying, well, I wasn't raised Protestant, or I'm not Protestant. I was raised Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, or Roman Catholic. Well, we have a much shorter book, and which is also appropriate for Protestants and anybody else, by the way, interested in the truth, on church history, called The Continuing History of the Church of God. You might be Greco-Roman Catholic of some version. Say, well, we believe the writings of the church fathers, the early ones. You do? Well, if you actually will follow the faithful ones, they're quoted in this book. And why do I bring up history? Because these people here, for 40 years, have been led to the wilderness. Think they remember God provided them manna. They got to eat. Their clothes didn't wear out. And then even the young ones, their parents probably had to have told them, look, we were slaves in Egypt. We had these days of darkness. We had hail. We had frogs pop up. The firstborn of the Egyptians were killed. We crossed the Red Sea. Their whole army got destroyed. That's all history. It should have been important. But apparently God says now, even despite all the truth, they're still not going to go the right way, even when they knew the history. But we live in a society where people do not know the history. I'll pick on one guy by name. I don't think he'll be too offended. There's a former evangelical Protestant. Now he's more of an agnostic. His name is Dr. Bart Ehrman. He teaches at, I think, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I actually bought from Master Learning Course 16 DVDs, I guess, of his lectures he did on church history. And I listened to him a couple of times. And since I would listen to him, actually, they were CDs. So I think my family had to hear him a lot of times we were driving around too. Well, Dr. Ehrman began as an evangelical Protestant, But after he started looking at church history, basically, he threw up his hands and said, what we have now, it wasn't obvious that this is what we were going to end up with. He says, when I look at the beginning. And he basically threw up his hands and he's become an agnostic. Okay? I'm not encouraging anybody to become an agnostic. As a matter of fact, I think you can absolutely positively prove God exists. Okay? Which is why I'm holding up this booklet, Is God's Existence Logical? So I don't think you should be an agnostic. As a matter of fact, keep playing with the books here, I think you can absolutely prove Jesus is the Messiah as well. Therefore, not only should you not be an agnostic, you should be a real Christian. We have a book proof Jesus is the Messiah. There's hundreds of prophecies that Jesus fulfilled. Now, a lot of secular people say, well, those prophecies don't count because the New Testament, those people intentionally twisted things to make it look like Jesus fulfilled the prophecies. That's not true, but that's what a lot of the secular people will tell you. Well, then what about, for example, in this book, there's like 10, 11, maybe 12 prophecies that Jesus gave that were fulfilled after the New Testament was written. Okay? So for prophecy skeptics, they ought to consider that and consider the others are true. But we've got people who don't want to know church history. Because if they knew it and understood it, they wouldn't be where they are. And they're not comfortable with that. They like this kind of stuff, which is not part of true church history. Okay, getting back to here. Verse 22. Then Moses wrote this song the same day and taught it to the children of Israel. Then he inaugurated Joshua, the son of Nun, and said, be strong and of good courage, for you shall bring the children of Israel into the land which I swore to them, and I will give it to you. So it was, when Moses had completed writing the words of the law in this book, and they were finished. Then Moses commanded the Levites who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, saying, take this book of the law and put it beside the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be a witness against you. For I know your rebellion, your stiff neck. If today, while I'm still alive with you, you've been rebellious against the Lord, how much more after my death? Gather me all the elders of your tribes and your officers, that I may speak these words in their hearing, and call heaven and earth to witness against them. For I know after my death you will become utterly corrupt, and will turn aside from the way which I have commanded you, and evil will befall you in the latter days, because you will do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger through the works of your hands. Now notice he says they're going to do stuff in the latter days. Okay? Then Moses spoke in the hearing of all the assembly of Israel all the words of the song until they were ended. And I'm going to read those words of the song in just a moment. I think another reason that God had Moses die on the other side of the Jordan was so to have Joshua bring them over, so they would see that Joshua really was also God's guy. And in the case of the continuing Church of God, I've mentioned before that God, according to Herbert Armstrong, gave Loma Armstrong a dream that was half of it was fulfilled while they were alive. And in the case of the continuing Church of God, I had a couple of dreams, and somebody I didn't know also had one, somebody out of New Zealand, prior to the formation. And so I think similar to how the old Radio Church of God began, so did we. Anyway, getting back to the book of Deuteronomy, this time chapter 32, and this is the song that God told Moses to write. Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Let my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, and as raindrops on the tender herb, and as showers on the grass. For I proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God. He is the rock. His work is perfect. Now, we go through tests and trials. Do we always think God's work is perfect? Probably not. I doubt that we always think it, because sometimes it's like, God, don't you know what we're going through? But this is what his work is perfect, even though we don't understand all of it at times. For all his ways are justice. A lot of people don't think that. But God has a plan. He knows your background. He knows how you've been treated, mistreated. He knows about your genetics. He knows everything. And he'll make it work out. A God of truth and without injustice. Righteousness and upright is he. Let me just comment once. I remember hearing something from a minister in Old Worldwide Church of God that had something to do with demonic possession, and some demon was cast out or whatever. And basically, what I remember hearing was that the demon said he was a demon basically because God wasn't fair. Okay, that was what I recall. I don't remember exactly when this was. It's got to have been at least 30 years ago, maybe even 40 years ago. I remember hearing that story, assuming it's the case. Anyway, we don't want to be like the demons. Verse 5, they have corrupted themselves. They are not his children because of their blemish, a perverse and crooked generation. See how perverse this generation is becoming. Do you thus deal with the Lord, O foolish and unwise people? If you're watching the media, you see a lot of foolish and unwise people. Is he not your father who brought you? Has he not made you and established you? Remember the days of old. Oh, you mean pay attention to church history? I threw that in there. It wasn't in my notes. Just seemed to fit. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you. Your elders, and he will tell you. When the Most High divided their inheritance in nations, when he separated the sons of Adam, you can read some about that in Genesis 10. He set boundaries to the people according to the number of the children of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the place of his inheritance. He found him in a desert land, in the wasteland, a howling wilderness. He encircled him. He instructed him. He kept him as the apple of his eye. We're trying to instruct you. As an eagle stirs up its nest, hovers over its young, spreading out its wings, taking them up, carrying them on its wings, so the Lord alone led him, and there was no foreign god with him. He made him ride in the heights of the earth, that he might eat the produce of the fields. He made him draw honey from the rock, and oil from the flinty rock, curds from the cattle, and milk of the flocks, with the fat of the lamb. And rams of the breed of Bashan, and goats, with the choicest wheat, and you drank wine, the blood of grapes. But Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. He grew fat, he grew thick. You are obese. That was not a compliment. Then he forsook God who made him, and scornfully esteemed the rock of his salvation. They provoked him to jealousy with foreign gods, with abominations they provoked him to anger. Remember, this is a song. They were taught this song, and you're all supposed to learn how to sing this song. They sacrificed to demons and not to God. I know I've shown this picture. The Apostle Paul warned the things that they do to demons when they're doing their holidays. We're not supposed to blend them like that. Specifically, he was talking about, amongst other things, Passover, which they now call Easter. They say that's actually supposed to be Passover. They have all kinds of symbols that have nothing to do with the Bible, nothing to do with Passover for that matter. And they seem to think it's totally fine. It's their holiest day of the year. Verse 17, they sacrificed to demons, not to God. The gods they did not know. To new gods, new arrivals that your fathers didn't fear. Of the rock who begot you, they are unmindful, and have forgotten the God who fathered you. And this rock is referring obviously to God. And in Matthew 16:18, we have a reference. Jesus is talking to Peter, and Jesus is referring to himself as the rock, and Peter is basically as a pebble. But we've got the Roman Catholic Church that says, oh no, the rock was Peter. But even the New Jerusalem Bible agrees in the Book of Deuteronomy that God is the rock, and in other places the Bible. So just wanted to mention that. Verse 19, when the Lord saw it, he spurned them because of the provocation of his sons and his daughters. And he said to them, I'll hide my face from them, and I will see what their end will be. For they are a perverse generation. children in whom there is no faith. You know, Jesus said, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on the earth? They provoked me to jealousy by what is not God. They've moved me to anger by their foolish idols. But I will provoke them to jealousy by those who are not a nation. I will move them to anger by a foolish nation. For a fire is kindled in my anger, and shall burn to lowest depths. It shall consume the earth with her increase, and set on fire the foundations of the mountains. I will heap disasters upon them. I will spend my arrows on them. They shall be wasted with hunger, devoured by pestilence and bitter destruction. And I will send against them the teeth of the beast, with the poison of the serpents of the dust. And yes, countries such as the United States are going to experience hunger to a greater degree than they would imagine. Verse 25, the sword shall destroy outside, there shall be terror within. And we've seen terror within this year, and we'll see more of this coming. Terror is prophesied. The young man and the virgin, the nursing child and the man of gray hairs, I would have said, I will dash them to pieces and make the memory of them cease from among men. Had I not feared the wrath of the enemy, lest their adversary should be misunderstood, lest they should say, our hand is high, and it is not the Lord who has done all this. For they are a nation void of counsel. We're seeing that more and more in this particular nation, as well as other nations around the world. Nor is there any understanding in them. Oh, that they were wise and they had understood this. Well, they claim to be wise, but professing to be wise, they become fools, it says in the New Testament. That they would consider their latter end. How could one chase 1,000, or two put 10,000 to flight, unless their rock had sold them and the Lord had surrendered them? For their rock is not like our rock, even our enemies themselves being judges. For their vine is the vine of Sodom, and their field is the field of Gomorrah. And we know that they were destroyed, and the New Testament says to set an example for those who would go against strange flesh. But the LGBTQ people don't want to understand it to mean that. Their grapes are grapes of gall. Their clusters are bitter. Their wine is the poison of serpents and the cruel venom of cobras. Is this not laid up in store with me, sealed up among my treasures? Vengeance is mine and recompense. Their foot shall slip in due time, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and the things to come hasten to them. And we're getting very close. I think of one of the sermonettes, it was mentioned that we may only have one or two more times where this book of the law will be read before the end. I don't believe it'll be two more times. Maybe it won't even be one more time. But it will be one more time in the sense, before Jesus comes, yes, it'll be at least one more time. Will it be two? I'm not of the opinion that it is. We'll see. We'll see based on what? The signs Jesus said to look for example, in Matthew 24, which also he referred to Daniel. So we're waiting to see some of those things, but we are seeing some other things happen. So again, maybe we'll only do this one more time before Jesus comes. Verse 36, for the Lord will judge his people and have compassion on his servants when he sees that their power is gone and there's no one remaining, bond or free. He'll say, where are these gods, the rock in which they sought refuge, who ate the fat of their sacrifices and drank the wine of their drink offering? Let them rise up and help you and be your refuge. Now see that I, even I am he, and there's no God besides me. I kill and I make alive, I wound and I heal. Nor is there any who can deliver from my hand. Again, this is all part of that song. The long song. And they would have memorized this song, by the way. I don't know how often they would have sung it, but a lot of them would have memorized it. Verse 40, for I'll raise my hand to heaven and say, as I live forever, if I whet my glittering sword and my hand takes hold on judgment, I will render vengeance on my enemies and repay those who hate me. I will make my arrows drunk with blood and my sword devour flesh. With the blood of the slain and the captives, from the heads of the leaders of the enemy. Rejoice, O Gentiles, with this people, for he will avenge the judge of his servant. He will avenge the blood of his servants and render vengeance to his adversaries. He will provide atonement for his land and his people. So at the end, he mentions, by the way, God does have this atonement plan. Verse 44, so that song is over. So Moses came with Joshua the son of Nun and spoke all the words of this song to the hearing of the people. Moses finished speaking all these words to Israel, and I've now said these to you. And he said to them, set your hearts on all the words which I testify to you today, which you shall command your children to carefully observe all the words of this law. For it's not a futile thing for you, because it is your life, and by this word you shall prolong your days in the land which you cross over into Jordan to possess. Now again, I realize we're not about to go to a physical promised land. We get to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, which is a foretaste, so we can become part of the millennial kingdom of God. This is good news. And yes, we have a booklet. I'll hold up the good news of the gospel of the kingdom of God. And this booklet is available in over 100 languages at the ccog.org website. Verse 48. Then the Lord spoke to Moses the very same day, saying, go up to this mountain of the Abarim, Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, across from Jericho. View the land of Canaan, which I give to the children of Israel as a possession. So he gets to get his glimpse of the kingdom, or the promised land, and we get a sort of a glimpse of the kingdom with the Feast of Tabernacles. And die in the mountain which you ascend to be gathered to your people, just as Aaron your brother died at Mount Hor and was gathered to his people, because you trespassed against me among the children of Israel at the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin, because you did not hallow me in the midst of the children of Israel. What happened with Moses? He felt a lot of pressure from the people and he got mad. He didn't say, oh, well, I'm of this particular tribe and it's okay that I have anger and I could do this. God said, well, you shouldn't have, and so you didn't get to come in. However, verse 52, yet you shall see the land before you, though you shall not go in there, into the land which I am giving the children of Israel. Around the end of the 4th or early part of the 5th century, the Catholic saint and doctor of their church, Jerome, said he ran across these people called Nazarenes, who went to church on Saturday, believed the Old and New Testament, didn't eat unclean meats. They kept the kept the Feast of Tabernacles, And they said that this was showing them about the millennium. Same thing we teach. That's also throughout church history. So even hundreds of years ago, they felt that they were getting a glimpse of the millennial kingdom by keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. All right, now we're going to go into some prophecy. This is chapter 33 of Deuteronomy. Now this is the blessing which Moses, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death. And he said, the Lord came from Sinai and dawned on them from Seir, and he shone forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000s of saints from his right hand, came a fiery law for them. Yes, he loves the people. All his saints are in your hand. They sit down on your feet. Everyone receives your words. Moses commanded the law for us, a heritage of the congregation of Jacob. And he was king in Jeshurun when the leaders of the people were gathered, all the tribes of Israel together. Let Reuben live and not die. Let his men be few. Well, you notice I intentionally did not say the word nor, because that's not in there. It's not in the Hebrew. Somebody decided it should be in there. Yes, sometimes I accidentally skip over a few words, but in this case I want to make it absolutely clear I did not do that. We believe that remnants of Reuben, some of the descendants went into the land of France, The reason for this particular semi-blessing, curse blessing if you want it, is that Reuben defiled one of his father's wives, and he lost his firstborn status because of that. Verse 7, and he said this to Judah, "Hear, Lord, the voice of Judah, and bring against him to this people. Let his hand be sufficient for him, and may you be a help against his enemies." So this is a prophecy, we believe, related to the Jews, and many of them now dwell in the tiny nation called Israel. Continuing here in verse 8, and of Levi he said, "Let your Thummim and your Urim with your Holy One, whom you tested at Massah." And this had to do with the high priest wore this garment that had 12 stones on it. And according to rabbinical tradition or legend, certain stones would light up actually in answer to some kind of prayer or inquiry when they did certain things. The Bible doesn't really tell us that, but again, this is from some Jewish literature, which may or may not be correct. Okay. "With whom you contended at the waters of Meribah, who says of his father and his mother, I have not seen them, nor did he acknowledge his brothers, or know his own children. For if you have observed the word and you've kept your covenant, you shall teach Jacob your judgments and Israel your law." In earlier books of the Old Testament, when we had the problem with the golden calf, so that would be the book of Exodus, Moses said, "Who's with me?" or "Who's on God's side?" And the children of Levi said they would be. And we believe that's why they got the priesthood, and they were supposed to teach. They are scattered throughout the lands of Israel, but in the nation of Israel, there are descendants of Levi. They're pretty sure they've done tests with blood and DNA or whatever else. Although I'll tell you, as far as DNA tests go, I've heard that sometimes they're not all that accurate. For example, in the United States, people of certain Native American tribes have gotten tests done. And these are people who lived there, and their parents lived there, or their grandparents, all that, and they did not come out as Native American. So this is one of the reasons why some of the major tribes don't rely on that. But anyway, I do know that within Israel, there are people who believe that they have identified who the Levites are. They actually have a high priest that they've designated. This would be the reconstituted Sanhedrin and the Temple Institute, and there may be some other smaller groups that are also associated with that. Anyway, going to verse back to 10, they put incense before you and hold burnt sacrifice on your altar. And they did kind of an altar dedication back in 2018. "Bless his substance, Lord, and accept the work of his hands. Strike the loins of those who rise up against him, and of those who hate him, that they may not rise up again." Next here it says, "Of Benjamin, he said, the beloved of the Lord shall dwell in safety by him, who shelters him all the day long, and he shall dwell between his shoulders." The old Radio Church of God taught this had to do with the nation of Norway, the people of Norway. Verse 13, "And of Joseph he said, Blessed of the Lord in his land, with the precious things of heaven, with the dew, with the deep lying beneath, with the precious fruits of the sun, with the precious produce of the months, with the best things of the ancient mountains." We believe this has to do with his descendants, Manasseh, many of which ended up in the United States, and Ephraim, which became the British descended nations. And we're going to go to some other prophecies related to that a little bit. "With the precious things of the everlasting hills, with the precious things of the earth and its fullness, in the favor of him who dwelt in the bush, let the blessing come on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers." And that's kind of interesting from a prophetic perspective. While the old Radio Church of God essentially taught that most of the descendants of Israel, the sons of Israel, went to the continent of Europe, you've got the British Isles, which are separated, and then you've got Australia and New Zealand, which are separated, and then the United States, which is separated. Of course, we got Canada next to it, which was also separated from back then because people didn't realize there was a Western Hemisphere. Anyway, verse 17. His glory is like a firstborn bull, which is basically a symbol of Britain, and his horns are like the horns of the wild ox. So, dangerous, militarily. Together with him he shall push the peoples to the ends of the earth. They are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. And I've mentioned about the ends of the earth just a moment ago. Now I'd like to go out of Deuteronomy for a little bit. I want to go to the book of Genesis. A couple different reasons I'm doing this. Genesis 48. Give me a moment to get there. Starting in verse 1, it says, it came to pass after these things that Joseph was told, hey, indeed your father is sick. So he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Jacob was told, look, your son Joseph is coming to you. And Israel strengthened himself and stood up in his bed. Jacob was renamed Israel, so the name Israel and Jacob were the same person. And Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, behold, I'm going to make you fruitful and multiply you. I'm going to make you a multitude of people, give this land to your descendants as an everlasting possession. And now your 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt, before I came into Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they are mine. They shall be mine. So he just adopted them because Reuben and Simeon were his kids. Your offspring who you beget after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of the brothers in their inheritance. But as for me, I came from Padan. Rachel died there besides me, and I buried them. Then, verse 8. Israel saw Joseph's sons and said, who are these? Now, a minute ago, he mentioned them, but I guess his eyesight wasn't all that good. Joseph said to his father, these are my sons who God has given me to this place. He said, bring them to me, and I'll bless them. The eyes of Israel were dim with age, so he couldn't see. Joseph brought them near him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I hadn't thought to see your face, but now God showed me your offspring. Joseph brought them beside his knees and bowed down face on the earth. And Joseph took them, Ephraim and Manasseh, with Ephraim toward his right, with Ephraim his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near him. So Joseph says, okay, I'm going to set this up since my dad can't see. I want to make sure he puts his right hand on Manasseh and his left hand on Ephraim, because that's the way it should be done. Then Israel stretched his right hand, put it on Ephraim, and his left hand put it on Manasseh, guiding his hands knowingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph, saying, God, before whom my father Abraham and Isaac walked, God who's fed me all the day, my life to this day, and God's fed you to this day. The angels has redeemed me from all evil. Bless the lads, let my name be on them. So let my name be on them. In other words, they could be called Israel. So some of the prophecies in the Old Testament regarding Israel have to do with Ephraim and Manasseh. And we've got people these days who think the only Israelites are people who are the Jews. In the name of my father Abraham and Isaac. Without going any further, let me just say that many believe the term Saxons means Isaac's sons. And let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. Now, when Joseph saw what his fathers did, he tried to switch the hands. He didn't like this. But his father refused and said, I know, son. I know what I'm doing. Okay? He's going to be great. He'd be Manasseh. But his brother is going to be, younger brother is going to be greater. His descendants are going to become a multitude of nations. Now, what do many others teach about this? I held up this book about Protestantism. They don't teach this in general. Okay, they don't teach it. And to be more specific, a Protestant gave me this book written by a guy by the name of John Woolward. Now, Woolward actually was a translator for the King James Version of the Bible. He was with Dallas Theological Seminary. And he had this prophecy book. And he said that it has answer to all prophecy in his book. Well, two problems with that. One, that's a pretty arrogant thing to say. You have the answers to all prophecy. Okay? The Apostle Paul said, we know in part, we prophesy in part, we see in part, we see dimly now. Number one. Number two, I couldn't find anything about Antichrist in that particular book, and I've read it 2 or 3 times. Maybe I missed it. If it's in there, there's not much. Number three, he basically says these prophecies here, and the ones in chapter 49, by the way, which have to do with the other tribes of Israel, those were fulfilled a long time ago, through history. But he didn't tell you how or where. I want to skip to verse 1 of chapter 49 here. And I'll get back to this other stuff in a minute. Jacob called his sons and said, gather together, and I may tell you what will befall you in the last days. Not the days before Jesus came, the last days. You got Protestant theologians who are telling everybody all this stuff happened a long time ago. Oh, really? When was Ephraim a company of nations? Okay, I looked in church history, or not just church history, I looked in ancient history. The Bible doesn't talk about Ephraim being a company of nations. Read the Book of Kings. You can read Judges, Joshua, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Samuel. It's not in the Bible. What, when they became captive from the Babylonians, they became a company of nations? No, I don't think so. You mean if some of them came back to the land of Judea, Palestine, when the Romans were ruling it, they were a company of nations then? No, I don't think so. But you've got people being taught this nonsense. They don't know history. Did we ever see any peoples become a company of nations that we read about in Genesis chapter 48? In a great nation? Oh yeah, it was called Great Britain. The British Empire was the largest land empire the world had ever seen. And also a very prosperous empire. The British pound became the first real reserve currency for the world since whatever the Romans had in ancient times. Oh, it's there. They don't want to see it. They don't want to believe it. And they think a lot of the Old Testament is done away anyway. And I can assure you that with the exception of some of them called Messianics, the Protestants are not generally going through and reading the Book of the Law every 7 years of the Feast of Tabernacles, because I don't think they need to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, most of them. Well, many of them haven't even heard of it. And they certainly don't read the Book of the Law. And if they're reading the Book of the Law every 7 years, they would have read what I was started to read in Deuteronomy chapter 33 about some last days prophecies related to the different tribes of Israel. But they don't hear about that. They just think they're all Jews. And in the 49th chapter, and I'm going to read all of the 49th chapter, but the 49th chapter gives reasons why. Let me just read. I've read about Reuben. I'll just read about Reuben. Verse 3 of chapter 49. Reuben, you're my firstborn, my might, the beginning of my strength, the excellency and dignity, excellency of power. But you're unstable as water. You're not going to excel because you went up to your father's bed, you defiled it, you went up to my couch. So I alluded to that before. That's why didn't get the blessing, and why we see some instability in places like France. All right, we're going to go back to Deuteronomy 33. And of Zebulun he said, rejoice, Zebulun, in your going out. We believe this is a prophecy related to the Dutch. Now let me say this. We do not teach that every single person in France descended from Reuben. Every single person in the Netherlands descended from Zebulun. Every single person in the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada descended from Ephraim, nor everybody in the United States from Manasseh. Matter of fact, let's talk about the United States and Manasseh for a moment. The United States has long been called a melting pot. Now, it's kind of a melting pot with also subsections. Over in the time of Jesus, there were these people called Samaritans. These Samaritans said they descended, by the way, from Joseph, and they were mixed with the Babylonians and various other groups. And in the end times, and I'm not going to go through all these prophecies, but I think Hosea and Amos, those two come to mind off the top of my head. There's certain, and in Isaiah, there's certain prophecies regarding Samaria that are end time prophecies for the United States. But again, we don't claim that all of them, all the people in those lands descended from there. Now, I've tried to look at migrations and DNA and all that type of stuff. There's certain DNA evidence, but the DNA evidence is only partially conclusive. Other people say the DNA evidence totally destroys the idea. But if you believe the Word of God, you know that these prophecies had to take place in the end times. And again, as I mentioned, if you look throughout world history, not just church history, world history, the only place that I and some others have been able to find who've looked for it, of any people becoming a company of nations, and so great, was fulfilled by the British Commonwealth. Okay, I didn't mention the fact that not only did they have the English-speaking nations, but they had many non-English-speaking nations. Matter of fact, Adolf Hitler was very impressed with the British, could not understand or wanted to understand how so few of them could control so many people in India. Okay. He actually tried to pattern some of his intent for his millennium. His Third Reich was what it was supposed to be. He was going to bring his version of millennium, which wouldn't be nice for people of color, people who are Jews, people of Church of God, people of various groups, including various European groups he considered to be inferior. And anybody who wasn't European, he considered them inferior as well. So after a while, he considered pretty much everybody. But he was impressed with that. He knew a little bit about world history. Okay? That doesn't mean once you know about world history, you're going to become the Fuhrer and want everybody to raise their hands up to you. But we have many people in the 21st century who don't know anything about world history, or very little about it. And again, if you believe the Bible, you know somebody had to fill those prophecies. You look at world history, hey, there was the people who did it. But I've read explanations, or I've seen them on things like Discovery Channel or History Channel or National Geographic or, whatever, those kind of channels. It's like, I saw this one about blessings, something to do with blessings and cursings, and it's like, well, that only really happened not because these people didn't do what God said, but because this happened. Some world event happened and it made it happen. Forgetting that, God controls the weather and God does all this other stuff. But that's the kind of society that we're now in. All right, getting back to this. And Issachar will be in your tents. And we consider that Finland represents Issachar. They shall call the peoples to the mountains. They shall offer sacrifices to the righteous. They shall be partakers of the abundance of the seas and the treasures hidden in the sand. And this is one of the reasons why we have Zebulun and Issachar, because their location with the seas. And I'm not going to go back to this, but in Genesis 49, there's more information about Zebulun and Issachar and the other tribes. You put that together with this together, and you look at world history, and you put it all together, and you end up with the speculations of the identities. Verse 20. And of Gad he said, blessed is he who enlarges Gad. He dwells as a lion, and he tears the arm and the crown of his head. He dwells as a lion. There were several reasons that Switzerland, which we believe is represented by Gad here, was not invaded. One was it was convenient for Adolf Hitler's people to be able to use their banking and some other stuff for them. On the other hand, in Sweden, for that type of warfare, not Sweden, Switzerland, all their men basically were trained to be in the military. Okay, it was kind of mandatory. They pretty much all had guns. They all basically had to have military training, and they still have it to this day. The difference between now and then is I'm not so sure that the type of warfare that was going on in World War II would work in the next World War. You could use neutron bombs or whatever, just knock out all the people, and so that wouldn't work. But back at Hitler's time, I think he decided that it was quite enough to fight on the Russian front, fight the British, and fight the Americans and the Canadians and Australians and New Zealanders, and also to throw in Switzerland on top. But yeah, just because they were heavily armed for that type of war. But again, I don't think it would be effective, and it will not be effective with the next major war. He provided himself the first part for himself because a lawgiver's portion was reserved there. And you have the world court held over in Switzerland. He came, or parts of it. He came with the heads of the people. He administered justice to the Lord. His judgments were with Israel. Verse 32. And of Dan he said, Dan's a lion's whelp. He shall leap from Bashan. And we've tended to believe that Denmark comes from there, and probably also the Irish. Verse 23. And of Naphtali, we believe Naphtali was represented by Sweden. He said, O Naphtali, satisfied with favor and full of the blessings of the Lord, possess the west and the south. And of Asher, he said, Asher is the most blessed of the sons, and we believe this had to do with Luxembourg and Belgium. As far as being the most blessed of the sons, it's been a while since I looked, but the last time I looked, the nation that had the highest per capita income, other than maybe one of the little oil sheikdoms, okay, where 10 people own billions of dollars, whatever, they just did the math. I think the highest income per capita was Luxembourg. And Luxembourg and Belgium, we think, are represented by Asher. Let him be favored by his brothers. Let him dip his foot in oil. Your sandals shall be iron and bronze. As your days, so your strength will be. And actually, I remember when we went to Luxembourg last, there was a reason they made Luxembourg, by the way. It was because people kept fighting for it. They wanted control of it, so they made it a separate country because of how it had these mountains and big caverns or valleys or whatever you want to call them that people couldn't get across, and everybody wanted to have it. So one of the ways they solved one of the wars, and I'm sorry I don't remember which war, probably some more in the early 1800s, so the French and the Germans and the Italians and stuff wouldn't keep fighting for the same piece of property. They said, we'll make this a separate country. And that's actually what they did for that. Okay, going down to verse 26. There is none like the God of Jeshurun, who rides the heavens to help you, and in his excellency in the clouds. The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will thrust out the enemy from before you, and will say, destroy. Then Israel will dwell in safety, the fountain of Jacob alone, in the land of grain and new wine. His heavens will also drop dew. Happy are you, O people. Who is like you, a people saved by the Lord? A shield of your help and the sword of your majesty. Your enemies shall submit to you, and you shall tread down their high places. And we've seen that. Now I want to make another couple of comments. I want to go to the book of Colossians chapter 11. I want to talk about something that comes up every now and then. One thing that Satan likes to do is called guilt by association. Okay? In my own personal case, I've had at least two different kinds of so-called guilt by association. One was quite a few years ago. Somebody had posted something I wrote about voting at a website, this webmaster, and somebody wrote him and said, oh, you can't have that up because I was supposedly racist. And the reason I was supposedly racist is because we teach British Israelism. And therefore, because a lot of people who teach British Israelism basically are white supremacists, we must be a white supremacist group, and therefore you shouldn't have anything to do with us. Now, to this particular webmaster's credit, I wrote him and said, no, we're not racist. We believe that all people can be saved. It doesn't matter what color you are, if you're Israelite or not. I mentioned to him that I am predominantly Gentile, and so no, we don't teach that only blue blood Israelites are going to be saved. I also mentioned to him that, everybody's got to be descended from somebody, and just because we think we can identify who some of these people are, that doesn't make us racist. I mean, God said he made different promises to different people. And to this particular webmaster's credit, he was persuaded, and he posted something to the effect that he'd be willing to post stuff from us in the future, for me in the future. But again, Satan tried to use guilt by association. We have the same thing with some of the anti-Church of God sites. They'll go out and they'll refer to certain people who call themselves prophets in the Church of God who are demonstrably false, and they like to lump me in with that. And by the way, it's interesting why they call me false, and I'll just talk about that. I wasn't going to talk about it, but just thought of it now. And I posted that they've never called me false because I made a false prophecy. No, that's not, they don't call me a false prophet for that. They call me this, they say, because even though I told the truth about what happened when I had a double portion, I was prayed for a double portion of God's Spirit from a minister in the Living Church of God, they said that I lied. But I didn't lie. I said exactly what happened. As a matter of fact, he said the same thing. As a matter of fact, when I saw him again in November, he actually said that yes, he did it, and yes, his prayer was answered. Okay, but I'm called a false prophet because I said the truth of what happened. Okay, and one of these years, maybe they're going to, maybe somehow I wrote some speculation down that was wrong. Okay, maybe they'll find something. But so far, they just call me false because they can't stand the idea, and so I'm always lumped in with others. And again, we've been lumped in as with the racists when we're not racist. And as most of you know, we are predominantly a Gentile church. Right here, we're mostly probably Israelite, but overall, it's not even close because we have the bulk of our people are in Africa, and I've been there. The Nelsons have been there, and when we see these people, they don't look like Israelites, at least not physically to us. The people we have in India, Haiti, to name a few other lands, you add them all up, and then there's other lands, of course. The Philippines come to mind as well. Well, anyway, let's go into Colossians, verse 9, chapter 3. Do not lie to one another, since you put off the old man and his deeds. But sadly, people lie about us. And put on the new man, who is renewed in knowledge according to the image of him who created him. And God created all of us, no matter what our ethnic or racial backgrounds are. And we're in a society now where they're trying to stir up racial things all the time. They're trying to get all kinds of groups against one another. I read the prophecy about there'll be terror within you, and they're trying to stir it up. And I'm seeing this on both sides of the political spectrum, one way or the other. Where there is neither Greek nor Jew. So that basically meant Gentiles or Jews. Circumcised or uncircumcised, and that's particularly more specific, because at the time, only the children of the descendants of Israel were becoming circumcised. Barbarian, and it shouldn't say barbarian or Scythian. The Scythians were believed to be the people beyond the Euphrates River, and that those are the people who then migrated up north and ended up into Europe, the Scythians. Slave nor free. So it doesn't matter if you were born into nobility or you were born a slave. But Christ is all and in all. It's not a racial thing. However, if you're in the land, one of the Israelite descended lands, you've participated to some degree, hopefully, in the blessings of those lands. Okay? You've probably had clothes, food, electricity, hopefully housing, various modern technologies and various other things, and grocery stores and whatever. That's great. But irrespective of your ethnicity, those of you who participated in the blessing may very well be affected by the cursings that will come to the same land as well. I was over at the Alamo yesterday for just a moment or so, and we also did something else, and they talked about General Santa Anna a little bit. And as many people should know, but maybe they don't, basically the land of the United States from Texas all the way to California, I think including Colorado, the United States got it by meeting with General Santa Anna and putting a gun against his head and say, you have a choice, you can give us this land or we pull the trigger. And so that land was signed over to the United States. I believe that land will be given back to the Mexicans, or at least parts of it, based on a prophecy in Daniel chapter 11, verse 39, that the king of the north will go against the land of the strongest fortresses and divide the land for gain. the strongest fortresses in modern times belong to the United States, and I believe that some of that land will go to Mexico. Some will go to other places as well. I'm not going to go to that here. But my point was, in terms of blessings and cursings, that those who've been partakers of the blessings may also be partakers of the cursing. All right, now to the last chapter of the book of the law. We're supposed to read in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 34, verse 1. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is across from Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali as far in the land of Ephraim, and Manasseh in the land of Judah as far as the western sea. And the western sea would have been Mediterranean Sea. The south, the plain of the valley of Jericho, the palm trees as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, "This is the land which I swore to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants, and I've caused you to see it with your eyes, but you shall not cross over there." And we've seen a glimpse of the kingdom of God by keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. So Moses, servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. Now, we're pretty sure Moses didn't write this. We believe this was probably written by Ezra. And as I've mentioned in other sermons and alluded to here, Moses probably wrote in some version of a Proto-Canaanite language or a Proto-Hebrew language. And by the time of Ezra, it was probably a language most people couldn't read. Okay, so we believe Ezra basically edited it and basically made it in a form that could be read then. And he added this. Now, it's also possible that Joshua wrote this portion. We don't know. And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his grave to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were not dim, nor his natural vigor diminished, unlike Jacob. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. So the days of the weeping and the mourning of Moses ended. Now Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hand upon him. So the children of Israel heeded him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. But since then there's not arisen in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. And all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, before Pharaoh and before his servants, and in all the land. And all the mighty power and all the great terror which Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. So yes, Moses was a powerful man, a man that God used powerfully. He was a man of humility, but a man accused of pride. But he did what God told him to do. And those of you who've been able to hear the book of the law during the Feast of Tabernacles this year have done what God said to do. In the continuing Church of God, we strive to do what God said to do. We're grateful to have had this opportunity to read this book of the law in 2020, as God commanded in his book of the law. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Continuing Church of God.